My name is Gil Herenstadt. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of CranioView. We're developing a wearable, non-invasive brain pressure monitor that can transform neurocritical care for the 97% of patients who are not candidates for invasive monitoring. Elevated brain pressure is often caused by traumatic brain injuries, stroke, and cardiac arrest. And these injuries can lead to increased pressure, swelling, and increased pressure, and ultimately can result in elevated brain damage and even death. The standard of care for accurately diagnosing and monitoring elevated brain pressure is an invasive procedure. This requires a neurosurgeon to drill through the skull and insert a catheter through the brain, which can be complicated by infections, bleeding, and many surgical revisions. This is the only accurate method available today. Yet, only about 3% of patients receive this gold standard invasive monitoring, which naturally is reserved for the most severe patients. In our customer discovery, clinicians told us that they would actually monitor up to 94% of patients. A non-invasive diagnostic tool would expand monitoring to mild risk patients. It would also facilitate earlier removal of invasive monitors and de-escalation in severe patients, reducing time in the ICU and lowering complications. And for moderate risk patients, it would enable earlier triage and timely care for those patients that end up developing elevated pressure, as well as those that do not. Our product is a wearable headset with ultrasound technology, utilizing image processing and machine learning to automate image acquisition and interpretation to provide a quantitative estimate of the pressure, which can then be displayed on a bedside monitor and alert the clinician if they are away from the bed. The current global market for ICP monitoring is $2 billion, made up primarily of the 3% invasively monitored patients. And this represents a significant untapped opportunity of $7.5 billion just in the ICU, which is where we intend to initiate our target initially. And we intend to follow that with targeting other hospitals with acute care and emergency rooms. We completed a feasibility study with healthy subjects, and we collected data with our prototype and demonstrated excellent accuracy of our auto-segmentation algorithm. And our system also accurately detects subjects' heart rate and a new potential biomarker for improved ICP estimation, which we're testing in our next study. We are seeking funding to advance our next clinical study in the neuro ICU, where we are collecting our imaging in parallel with invasive monitoring to validate our ICP estimation algorithm, which is a key component of our future pivotal study and FDA clearance. And with that technical milestone, we'll engage with healthcare systems to sign up for our initial commercial product. Our team has clinical and technical expertise, and we are advised, supported by Dr. Paul Vespa, who is a world-renowned expert in neurocritical care, and faculty at UCLA, where we are conducting our next clinical study in the neuro ICU. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. If you bring your high school son in from a head injury on the football field and you show a mild increase in pressure, what would the clinician?
So the question is,
what treatment would result from measuring that pressure with someone with a mild?
Right. So first, some mild patients can develop more threatening dangerous levels of elevated pressure. We don't really know because we don't measure any of them. And I think there's something to be said about, we just don't know a lot about what happens in mild risk patients and what opportunities that might open. But essentially, we want to prevent those that will have consequences to that elevated pressure.
So fascinating technology. As you know, with ocular ultrasound, you can get a qualitative kind of normal versus high ICP reading. Can you elaborate on why that is inadequate for like a triage purpose? Like, why do you need the specific ICP number?
Because that's a good question. It's just the time that it takes to do that. How often can you do that? Right? You may do that for triage. Not all places do. And then it's just, so maybe it isn't clear what needs to happen next with that patient, and that means you have to continue doing the. So today you may be referring to ocular ultrasound. In practice, it requires a skilled operator to do it. It takes the time that it takes to do it, and it's not. It doesn't provide the accuracy, right? The specificity and sensitivity and specificity.
Just more about the reproducibility and automation. Is that kind of where the value
yeah.
is?
So that's a key component of it. Yeah.
It sounds like also part of your value is continuous pressure monitoring. Is that?
Yeah,
correct?
for some patients, not for all. I mean, in the neuro ICU, probably that's where it's most valuable to have continuous. But if you think for triaging before the like in the emergency department or on emergency services, or after once they're released from the ICU, then you can kind of spot check, right, what the pressure is, and our device can potentially do both.
What are the risk factors associated with this technology from technology perspective, from decision-making perspective, from taken actions or missing actions perspective?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I want to know what are the risks, right?
Yeah.
For the technology, not only technology-wise, but
Right.
also like from users' perspective, right? When they are taking certain actions based on readouts.
Okay, so from a clinical use perspective, for example, or even, I mean, obviously there's regulatory, right? We have to go through the regulatory pathway, which is probably like a class 2 device. From a clinical perspective, I mean, we will have to validate, of course, that we are close to the bench. What is the benchtop? What is the standard of care, which is the invasive monitoring, and make sure that it's easy to use for the clinician, it gives them what they need to see and to know. Yeah.
Gil, I think you've got something kind of clever here. And certainly the risk factors are dependent on which cohort you're going to measure, right? Whether it's an ICU patient or it's an elderly patient that's fallen, to determine whether they have an intracerebral bleed or intracranial bleed. Actually, that particular application could be very interesting in the long run. A fair number of elderly fall, they hit their heads, and they are oftentimes observed 24, 48 hours in the hospital because we're worried that they have intracranial bleed. And one of the ways, in fact, the gold standard for it is the repeat CT, usually within 8 hours, and at other times 24, 48 hours, depending on their mental status. And then we have nurses that do mental status checks to see if they become somnolent or if they complain of headaches and whatnot. Application of this technology could give you an objective measurement of
Right.
whether somebody is having an increasing intracranial pressure, which is generally very underutilized because we're not going to drill a hole into somebody's head unless we believe we're going to need to extract that intracranial bleed. But the risk in that particular case is reliability, sensitivity, and accuracy. And so define for me your steps in terms of how you're going to get there. I understood you're going to take this to the intensive care unit where there is an ICP monitor that's been placed. You're going to simultaneously put that on these people to determine the correlation between the two. The challenge, though, is that that's a very specific set of patients. And then whether that particular correlation is applicable to somebody else, an elderly that's fallen and has an intracranial bleed or not, could be a leap. And if you missed it, the consequences could be serious. So give me a path in terms of, one, how you're going to move from the ICU into a broader market that you defined earlier, and the steps you're going to need to take to do that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, that comes down to the quality of the data that we have, right? We want to include in our studies patients with a a broad range of pressures, and we are starting with a few indications, maybe just TBI and stroke, but down the road we want to include other patients that ultimately will be maybe more similar to someone who might fall a senior who might fall, but the key will be really to validate our algorithm on as broad as possible range of pressures so that we can. It's probably easier to validate on the maybe on the slightly higher pressures than on the lower ones, but it's potentially also important.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. I can think of other very accurate devices for continuous monitoring of other organs that are underutilized. So I think it's just a comment on that, or the specific patients, types of patients. I think focus on that adoption, the ease of placing the form factor on the head. All those things I think become critical, but also the cost to do this. And I've just seen other great technologies, because they're not standard of care, not used to the degree they should be because of cost or convenience or form factor, things like that.
Yeah. Are you asking?
So more of just a comment elaborating on the adoption
I agree,
side of
I
it,
agree.
and also the accuracy of the data.
100% agree. I mean, we will
Thank
need
you,
to
Gil.
address those.
Appreciate it. Great presentation.
Thank you, everyone.